Nigel, you're a fraud.
A Brexit clash off Westminster as Cameron defends calling the referendum and pleads with doubting voters to support staying in Europe.
Surrendered our territorial waters as members of the European Union, and there is, as members, nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
Good evening from Cardiff, where we've been talking with the Prime Minister as the referendum campaign enters its final week. As the Chancellor unveils an emergency budget in the event that the UK votes to leave Europe, we asked Mr Cameron, where's his fight? Where's his passion for Europe? And what of the infighting with Cabinet colleagues voting to leave?
Some of your very own ministers have said you can't be trusted.
Well, it's a passionate campaign, and that is inevitable when you've got such an enormous issue.
And as the Remain camp argue over concessions on freedom of movement, we're in the constituency of Torfaen, the Valley's Labour heartlands, where UKIP got its highest share of the vote, to find out why immigration is key to people's decision to stay or go.
Public services would collapse without migrants.
But if we didn't have the immigrants, we wouldn't have 1.odd million people out on the dole at the moment.
And here in this fine Cardiff pub, we'll be asking people what they think tonight. And from Orlando, video emerges of the killer Omar Mateen when he was an armed security guard. He was secretly filmed for a documentary 5 years ago when he worked for G4S. And bought in 15 minutes, we show how easy it is to buy an assault weapon like the one used by Mateen.
So that was easy?
That was way too easy.
And what is it?
This is the AR-15.
Also tonight, billionaire Sir Philip Green faces down MPs over the failure of BHS and promises to sort out what he calls the pensions mess. But the MPs remain unimpressed and want more answers. And the late Liberal MP and broadcaster Sir Clement Freud has been accused of abusing 2 girls. His wife of 58 years says she is profoundly sorry. So, the referendum campaign sails ever closer to the wind, with rival flotillas on the Thames exchanging insults and some loose fire. More on that river pageant shortly. Here in Cardiff, I've been tackling the Prime Minister in a wide-ranging interview on the state that the campaigning has left the country in and where this is all ultimately headed. We'll hear his views in just a few minutes. But first, as George Osborne joined forces with the former Labour Chancellor to outline an emergency budget of spending cuts and tax rises, which they claimed would be needed if Brexit happens, over 50 Conservative MPs responded by saying they'll never let it happen. Our political editor Gary Gibbon has this.
George Osborne and his Labour predecessor Alistair Darling visited a train depot in Kent to join forces.
Mr. Osborne.
The old political opponents said leaving the EU would leave a £30 billion black hole in the British economy that would require tax rises and spending cuts. The dividend of money saved from the EU subscription, they said, would evaporate in lost growth and falling tax revenues. And that would require a brutal emergency budget.
You've got a situation today where you've got a Conservative Chancellor and a Labour Chancellor both saying to the country that there would be a big hole in the public finances, that you'd have to raise taxes and cut spending. And I tell you, there's only one thing worse than passing a budget like that. That's not passing a budget to deal with the situation and sending the economy into a tailspin.
There would not just be one emergency budget, but I suspect one after another. And far from having more to spend on public services, the giant contract at the heart of the Leave campaign is we'd actually have tens of £billions less to spend than if we remained in the European Union.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
While the Chancellor was speaking here in Ashford, Vote Leave issued a statement accusing him of teenage temper tantrums and vandalising the British economy. They issued a letter signed by 57 Tory MPs saying they'd vote down any sort of budget like this. That number significantly just above the threshold needed to trigger a vote of no confidence in David Cameron, even if he wins next week.
suspiciously, those names number over 50. It looks a bit menacing.
Well, I tell you, the most menacing thing today is the Chancellor's irresponsible statement in which he's talking the economy down and actually trying to say that he himself really wants this to happen. That is what he's saying. He's got this idea that he can scare the public. And I've sat here for a long time and I have never seen anything as irresponsible as the way he's treated the British public as they were his personal playthings and he can do with them as he pleases.
Ian Duncan Smith was one of 6 former cabinet ministers signing the letter attacking the so-called Brexit budget. But David Cameron was pushing the same message in his own cross-party appearance with Wales's Labour First Minister Carwyn Jones. The Remain campus started a last big push to wrestle back the agenda onto the economy after weeks of slippage, which have left this vote on a knife edge.
Gary Gibbon reporting. Well, now earlier outside the House of Commons, a flotilla of fishing boats making the case for leaving the EU was confronted by rival Remain vessels. Insults as well as some hose fire were exchanged in one of the most dramatic confrontations on the Thames since the 17th century. Our political correspondent Michael Crick witnessed the skirmishes.
The Battle of the Thames, more naughty than nautical perhaps, an amazing armada, 30 or so fishing boats sailing up to Westminster, led by UKIP leader Nigel Farage. Brexit, they said, would save Britain's fishing industry. But Remain had been tipped off, outswept a counterforce, little boats and large, under Admiral Sir Bob Geldof, with this broadside.
Nigel, you're a fraud. Britain makes more money than any other country in Europe from fishing. Britain has the second largest quota for fish in Europe after Denmark. 3. Britain has the third largest landings. You're a fraud, Nigel. Go back down the river, because you're up one without a canoe.
To the dismay of Remain colleagues, Geldof's signals were somewhat crude. This, I'm told, is semaphore for anchor. But this UKIP MEP gave as good as they got.
Millionaires just love it in the EU. What about working seamen? Not one sailor on your boat.
So what do you think of Bob Geldof calling you a fraud? Absolutely disgusting to think. He can call me what he likes, but to see him here effectively mocking, you know, these men that have come from all over the British Isles.
Mocking your policy.
Well, he doesn't understand it, does he? He clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. Let me explain. The Common Fisheries Policy is based on equal access to a common resource, which means, given that we've got the greatest fish stocks within the European Union by a long way, we have to share what is rightfully ours with the rest of the EU.
Then fishermen from a boat called Wayward Lad boarded the Geldof boat with some help from Sir Bob.
You're all wrong, and I will stand on this boat and I'll say you are wrong and you are wrong and you're wrong and you're wrong. Not one of you lot look like you've come out of Southend-on-Sea. None of you have come from Essex. Maybe you, sir, or you're London, yeah? But that is it. We played down there so many times. That Dr. Fielder. You and you're London through and through. I'm Irish.
The crowd on the UKIP boat sent referendum victory. Amid the carnival, one friend of Nigel Farage even told us the UKIP leader's been approached by the Boris Johnson camp about serving in a Johnson government. Feelers have been put up about you serving in a Boris Johnson government.
Really? You know more than I do.
Would you do that?
You know more than I do.
Would you be willing to serve in a Boris Johnson government? The idea is that you would take a place in the House of Lords for one of your friends?
This sounds like Fantasyland stuff.
But if Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, which he may well be come this autumn, he came along and offered you a job, you'd have to think about it, wouldn't you?
I will think about nothing beyond what happens next Thursday.
You're not turning down this idea of serving in a Boris
because
Johnson
you're coming
government.
up with...
Well, it's been mentioned to me by one of your...
Well, it hasn't to me.
Politics seems to be shifting, for they ended with Farage and Labour MP Kate Hoey in Titanic pose. Only this ship's not sinking. Not yet, at least.
Michael Crick reporting. Well, with the polls narrowly favouring Leave and the bookies tightening the odds, earlier I sat down with the Prime Minister, David Cameron, who's been campaigning here in Cardiff to remain in Europe.
Prime Minister, do you really think that if we vote to leave, we risk war economic damage, permanent damage to our welfare?
Well, let's take each one of those in turn. First of all, I never said that we would face World War III. I just simply said Europe has played a role in bringing the countries of Europe together after a century of two appalling conflicts. And while we should credit NATO, we should also credit the European Union.
But
and
you
I
didn't
asked
say
the question.
war. You
No,
didn't say
I
war.
didn't actually. I said, can we really take for granted that the security of our continent is guaranteed? And I don't think we can. So I think that's a perfectly realistic thing to say. As for the economic warnings, they're not just made by me, they're made by the IMF, the OECD, organisations that are paid to advise prime ministers and countries about economic risks.
But then why on earth did you risk this? I mean, if you knew that this was the risk to Britain, what on earth were you doing calling a referendum that risked the possibility this might happen?
Well, because I think it's right for the people to decide about how the country is governed and the arrangements under which we live with the European Union and the rest of it. We haven't had a vote since 1975, and I think we've had a lot of European treaties and changes since then, and referendums, frankly, have been promised and not delivered, and I think it was time to say, right, let's put this beyond doubt. Let's have a renegotiation, which I think was delivered successfully. We made some important changes, and now let's ask the people. I'm confident we'll get the right result, which is Britain staying in a reformed European Union. But, you know, the people are sovereign, not the politicians, and it's right to have this discussion and decision.
It's a very nice explanation, but with respect, the people were not crying out for a referendum. The people who were crying out were people in your own party.
Well, I don't really accept that, actually. All political parties were discussing and having pressures for referendums. It actually was popular in all parties and actually in all parts of the country.
Let's be candid, both you and Boris could have been outers. You could have been people for leave.
I've actually, in my political life, I've always argued for reform. I've never wanted us to join the Eurozone. I've always wanted Europe to change and for things to get done to make it more flexible. But I've never actually argued for out in my political lifetime. I've never argued for out.
No, but that's all lots of nevers. But you've never actually talked about the promised land in Europe. You don't have a passion for Europe. You've never expressed a passion. And that's, in a sense, why this competition, this campaign is in trouble.
I don't accept that. I'm not a utopian dreamer. I believe in the United Kingdom and in Britain and in our future, but I think we are better off, safer and stronger as part of a European Union. But my arguments, I accept. I'm a practical person. My arguments are mostly practical, about the strength of our economy, about the safety of our people, about the strength of our country. I think there are bits of idealism within me. I think that you know, when I look at the fact that we sit around this table and talk with each other and Europe has found a way to avoid conflict, that does make me proud. And
that's jolly difficult in the face of Albion and people talking about the old days, the good old days when Britain was great. We want to put the great back into Britain. And all you're saying is, well, I think we'd be a bit better in Europe. It's a bit safer.
I think I'm making a stronger argument than that. As I was saying today, you know, I think, you know, Churchill stood alone in May 1940 and decided to fight on. But he didn't want to be alone. He wanted to be fighting with others in Europe. He was standing up for European democracy and freedom and the rule of law, and I think we should stand up for that again today.
For you, it's do or die, isn't it? Have you got the fire you talked about just a year ago after the election?
I think you've seen from me a very passionate and strong pro-Remain campaign. I've been to every part of the United Kingdom. I've stood on platforms with politicians of different parties. I've made economic arguments. I've made, I think, very strong arguments about Britain's place in the world. You know, I think I've put everything I can into this campaign, and there's another 7 days to go after this one, and you'll see even more.
But if you look at what the issue now involves, it basically involves immigration and people who have jobs at stake, people who are worried about educational standards, people who are worried about the health service. They're worried about immigration, and you don't connect with them.
Well, I think immigration is a challenge, but I think everybody understands that you don't solve an immigration problem by wrecking your economy, which is what I think we do.
But it's not a challenge to your house, to your job. They feel individually challenged by immigration.
I think it is a challenge for everybody because of the pressure and because of the rate of change. And my argument is that there are good ways to control immigration. We need to do more to control it from outside the EU, which is, remember, more than half of the total net migration. And inside the EU, through my negotiations, securing this change so that people, they can come, but if they can't get a job and they can't support themselves, they have to go. And if they do stay, they have to work for 4 years paying in before they get full access to the welfare system. I think that's a change that has huge support in our country. It hasn't come in yet, but if we stay, it will. and it'll make a difference.
Do you think that what Boris Johnson and what Michael Gove have been saying has been true? Have they spoken the truth?
I'm going to focus, as I've said, on the issues and the facts and the figures and the arguments. Some of the claims made by the Leave campaign, I think, are completely untrue. The idea that Turkey's about to join the European Union is not true. For instance, the idea that we, 350 million a week is the cost of our membership, that is not true. And it's been important to nail these things during the campaign, and I think by and large we are doing that.
Can you imagine what that does to people looking in and wondering about their future government in this country? After all, technically, you've got 4 years to run. The idea that you're going to be working together with people that have accused you of lying, told lies according to you, spoken untruths, people who can't be trusted. Some of your very own ministers have said you can't be trusted.
Well, it's a passionate campaign, and that is inevitable when you've got such an enormous issue and such deep differences of opinion about whether Britain is better off remaining or Britain's better off cutting itself off.
But you're not
from
going to
Europe.
pretend that in the future suddenly all these things will be buried. Once you've had a referendum, it'll all be over, and we'll all be friends and toiling together in the interests of Britain. No, it doesn't stack up.
Well, I don't agree with that. We all supported a referendum. We'll accept the judgment of the British people, and we'll have to come back together again afterwards. And there's a huge government programme of life chances, reforming prisons, reforming schools, investing in childcare, creating a 7-day NHS. There's huge challenges to overcome. And I think you'll be surprised how politicians can have an argument, have that decided, and then get on with the other things about which they, by and large, agree.
Can I just ask you then about election expenses, which is something that we've worked out very extensively. Why have you been prepared to spend money on a QC to try and stop police investigating what we have revealed?
Well, we haven't been doing that. What we're doing is we are cooperating with the...
You had a QC in the Thanet South constituency, in the court, actually asking the judge to stop the investigation.
Well, there's a year-long process of investigating these things.
But you didn't want that year. You went to court to ask the court not to allow the police an extension to go on investigating these abuses.
That's right. As I said, there had been a year, and it's perfectly legitimate to argue, well, that's enough time to look at it. But look, I'm very happy for the Electoral Commission to examine all of this.
Well, why get a QC to stop it then?
Well, that was in one particular seat. But I'm very happy that they've got the time now and they've got all the paperwork to examine this. But I do
Well,
think...
they have got the paperwork, but Prime Minister, with respect, the Electoral Commission had to go to court to wring the papers out of you.
They didn't have to go to court.
They did.
They didn't.
They did.
That's not right.
You were 3 days overdue and they had to go to court.
We had told them when the papers were going to be delivered, and so in our view that was unnecessary.
That is not their view.
Well, that is not my view.
Will you, as Prime Minister, move this thing speedily through so that it can be resolved as quickly as possible? Because at the moment, your own majority, if any of this is proved, is in serious danger.
Well, what we're doing is answering the questions of the Electoral Commission. As I say, I think, look, it's a Channel 4 investigation, and I know you're proud of the work that you've done. We're very happy. We're answering all the questions. I think you're making quite a large mountain out of what I think is a relatively
So you disagree with the judge, then?
No. I think it's a relatively straightforward set of questions that we have to answer. I'm very confident we're going to answer all of them and put this issue comfortably away.
Final word on the referendum. Are you going to win?
I very much hope so. I believe so. I think we have the strongest arguments, and I think the more that people consider the future of our economy, the jobs, the livelihoods, the advantages we get out of being part of a single market of 500 million people, that we're better off if we stay in, the more people consider that argument and the risks of leaving. And to anyone who hasn't made up their mind, I would say when you think of the opportunities we want for our children, the place in the world we want for our country, the risks there are to that economy, if you're not decided, don't risk it.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
The Prime Minister talking to me earlier here in Cardiff. Well, our political correspondent Michael Crick joins us again now from Westminster. Michael, very interesting because definitely pro-European, pro-Remain, but no passion for Europe.
I know you gave him the opportunity there, John, and he didn't seize it. You remember during the last election, people said there wasn't enough passion in David Cameron, and then he held that meeting, rolled up his sleeves and told everybody, I'm pumped up. And the campaign was a bit different in the general election after David Cameron did that. But he's only got a 7 days now to show a bit more passion in this campaign, because there are a lot of people on the Remain side who think that unless he does so, unless he shows a bit more vision and idealism, then they're in big trouble. Of course, it'd be difficult, on the other hand, to come out and say, I love Brussels.
Now, of course, the thing which, of course, you've been reporting very extensively on, which is, of course, the election expenses scandal, he seems really to be kind of, well, this is mountain out of a molehill stuff, Michael.
He does. He argues that the battle buses that the Conservatives employed last spring in the general election are no different from the battle buses that for years have been taking party leaders around on the campaign trail. But the evidence is that the battle buses, the fleet they used last year, was for taking party volunteers to marginal seats in a centrally organised way. And when they got there, those volunteers were put up in hotels. Most important, that they were working on the ground, giving out literature for individual candidates, going around the doorsteps, reading out scripts, canvassing for individual candidates. And if that's so, then the rules suggest that those expenses should have been declared locally in a way that they weren't. And the Electoral Commission seems to think that as well.
Michael Crick at Westminster. And we stay in Westminster, where the billionaire Sir Philip Green has apologised for the collapse of BHS, which he owned until he sold it for £1 last year. Appearing before a joint hearing of two select committees, something he'd said last week he wouldn't do, he told MPs that nothing more has been said now than has ended. He said that the advisers were working on resolvable solutions for 20,000 members of the BHS pension scheme, which has a multi-million-pound deficit. Here's our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi.
The unacceptable face of capitalism. But Sir Philip Green's appearance delivered a 6-hour tour de force to try and rescue his reputation, and probably his knighthood too. His trump card, a proposed deal with the regulator to try and rescue the pension scheme. The light at the end of the tunnel, he said.
It's resolvable, sortable, we will sort it, we will find a solution, and I want to give an assurance to the 20,000 pensioners, I'm there to sort this.
Today was all about getting the public to reimagine Sir Philip, not as a tax-avoiding asset stripper, but as a builder of businesses committed to Britain.
What happened is beyond horrible, please, sad. There was zero intention, and I said either I'll leave here today, you think I'm a liar, or you think I'm telling you the truth, but I'm not a liar, okay? Unfortunately, we found the wrong guy.
The committee, he said, should also narrow in on what the regulator did, what Goldman Sachs said, and how a whole army of minted lawyers and accountants rolled out the red carpet for Dominic Chappelle and his fantasy world.
We 1,000,000% would not have done business with him. Okay. If they would have said, don't deal with this guy, that would be the end of it. I mean, there's no point in having somebody, but that's not the advice we got. There have been some bad mistakes made in these.
The blame game went on for hours in Parliament.
Representatives who represent the trustees can have no responsibility, right? Or the auditor, but I'm happy to take the blame. Right? We're here. I'm not running away and passing it to somebody else.
This was an uncomfortable testimony, awkward and difficult, with Sir Philip seeming to be on the verge of losing his temper at almost any moment. In particular, it was his exchanges with MP Richard Fuller that made for the most bizarre watching.
Do you mind not looking at me like that all the time? It's really disturbing. Sorry? No, you just want to stare at me. It's just uncomfortable, that's all.
And then?
Project Vera. Don't put you looking at
Project
me like
Vera, of course.
Put your glasses back on. You look better with your glasses on.
He's a retail boss, after all.
You seem a very dominant personality, but you seem extraordinarily thin.
There's 10 of you and 1 of me.
Yep. And you're holding your own. Believe me, Sir Philip, you're holding your own. But you seem extraordinarily thin-skinned to quite courteous questions.
The last 4 weeks, I could be a murderer, the way they're writing about me.
And the mood didn't improve when MP suggested he'd blocked a move by Mike Ashley to buy the ailing retailer before it went belly up.
Would I want to stop somebody buying it if they would rescue it? Why?
Ego.
Oh, please. I mean, come on. That's an insult.
No,
that's
it's not.
Really, that's really rude.
No, it's a case of,
Well, I find that really rude.
Well, I do apologise because I don't mean to be rude, but in terms of human nature...
I think we got to hear...
You couldn't make a success of it.
Excuse me.
You couldn't make a success of it, and you didn't want another retail billionaire to do the same. It wouldn't be that.
I'm glad the meeting's ending.
It was a long day. Some successes for Sir Philip, but often buried in a deluge of claim, counterclaim and irritation. As he sped away, employees and pensioners may well ask themselves how much has really been cleared up about what went wrong with BHS?
Helia Ebrahimi reporting. Well, we're joined now by Frank Field from outside the House of Commons on Abingdon Green. He's co-chairman of the House of Commons inquiry into the collapse of BHS. Frank Field, did you feel that you got anywhere today with Sir Philip?
Oh yes, we've got the basis of a report. What we also learned was that Sir Philip seemed unaware that the pension liabilities were rising to 571 million, but on a £7 million loan, part of a slightly larger package that he actually made to Dominic Chappelle, he knew precisely how that money was spent, and also his resentment that some of that money was spent on advisors which were giving credence to Dominic Chappelle. So I think we actually made quite a lot of progress. We follow this up now with asking for evidence from Sir Philip. I was amazed that something like probably 1.6 billion has gone through these companies up to his wife, Lady Green, and yet, though being a member of the companies, he doesn't even understand how much money went through. So we will be asking, if we're not already asked, for those minutes to see whether he was at the board meetings when this very, very large largesse, which was manufactured from both Arcadia and BHS, landed in Lady Green's bank account.
Well, now, what was very interesting, before we just get on to the question of the pension fund itself, was the very fact that Mr. Chappelle, this twice bankrupted individual, seemed to have some kind of verification at the hands of household names of all sorts of companies.
That's true. Sir Philip came and said he was responsible, so he owned up on that, and then spent a great deal of time pointing the finger at others, but saying, of course, I'm not pointing my finger at them. So, for example, city law firms, Goldman Sachs, they were all given this treatment, and then, of course, he said, I mustn't blame them, I'm the one to blame. He was the one that was taken in.
But
sorry, John.
Well, can I just take you to the very critical issue of the pension fund? Are we any closer to getting a commitment from Sir Philip to pay very large sums of money into the pension fund to alleviate the suffering of 20,000 pensioners?
Well, listening to him today, you would think that were true, and if in fact it's not true, then the 4 weeks that Sir Philip has had, which have been so unpleasant to him, is the beginning of a period of unpleasantness. He let us believe that this was a deal that was going to be far superior to what pensioners had been offered before, superior to if he allowed this scheme to go into the pension protection fund. So I think he's raised expectations. He's a very, very rich man, and I would expect that he's, I hope, doing a trade-off between the last 4 weeks, which you recorded properly, replayed. Well, it was hell for him, compared with what the future of hell for pensioners if he doesn't act.
Well, Frank Field, thank you very much for joining us. It sounds as if you're leaving a very large crossed fingers in the hope that we get something out of that pension fund.
I hope more than crossed fingers.
Sir Clement Freud, former Liberal MP, star of dog food adverts and the BBC radio show Just a Minute, has been accused of being a paedophile. An ITV investigation has revealed that he abused 2 young girls over decades. He died in 2009. Now his widow has apologised to his victims, saying she was shocked, saddened and deeply sorry for what he'd done. Paul McNamara has this report.
He had a certain power over me, which I didn't understand, and because it was something new, and it was a man, and I was desperate for a father's love. So it's the first time, aged 10, that a father figure comes into my life.
Sir Clement Freud, chef, entertainer, politician, and now alleged child abuser. That's the claim by Sylvia Woosley in a documentary to be broadcast tonight on ITV's Exposure. A family friend of Freud who began being groomed, she says, aged just 10 in the south of France.
He'd stroke me and he kissed me in the back of a bus on the mouth. It was all wet and it was horrible and I didn't like it. I was disgusted and helpless.
Aged 14, her mother's marriage falling apart, Sylvia was sent to live with Freud in London, where she says grooming progressed to abuse.
I just didn't react in any way because I couldn't. I didn't know what to do, and because my mother would have been angry, and because he was nice to me. And he was an adult, a grown-up, and I was a child.
I went and bought some Aberdeen Angus beef.
Sir Clement Freud's career would go through many incarnations. Celebrity chef, the famous face of a dog food, and in 1979 elected MP for the Liberal Party. His dour wit earned him a slot on the first episode of Radio 4's Just a Minute, and every episode until his death in 2009. A second woman who wishes to remain anonymous also claims that she was raped by Sir Clement Freud in 1978, aged 18. According to the founder of one abuse support charity, Clement Freud was a name they were aware of.
Sadly, the name Clement Freud was already in my consciousness from past experiences of talking with people that had made allegations about him.
Sir Clement Freud was married for nearly 5 decades to actress and theatre director Jill Freud. Last night she said,
"This is a very sad day for me. I was married to Clement for 58 years and loved him dearly. I am shocked, deeply saddened and profoundly sorry for what has happened to these women. I sincerely hope they will now have some peace."
And it is peace which Sylvia so desperately craves.
I don't want to take this to my tomb. I would like to just return to the child I was before I was molested physically, before I was introduced to that side of life too early.
Paul McNamara reporting. Now, over to Krishnan in Florida.
Well, here in Orlando, outside the Pulse nightclub, where 49 people were killed on Sunday, the FBI have just appealed for any witnesses who had any contact with the killer Omar Mateen to come forward. But the impact of this massacre on American politics already seems profound. Donald Trump, whose poll ratings have slipped this week, has turned his attention to trying to make his supporters in the gun lobby, the NRA, agree to new gun controls. Hillary Clinton has just stepped up her attacks on Trump's response to the massacre, calling it dangerous. But most arresting today has been the new video footage of the killer Omar Mateen himself. Caught on camera, the mass murderer Omar Mateen.
Morning.
Good morning. Do you have a badge?
No, I'm actually just wondering what's going on here.
Oh, it's for BP.
In a bizarre turn-up, the Orlando killer was secretly filmed 5 years ago as a security guard in a documentary about the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Like, there's people out here, but they're all scattered all over the place. There's no one really to talk to. Like, they're like hoping for more oil to come out and more people to complain so they'll have the jobs.
G4S have confirmed this is Mateen.
They want more disaster to happen because that's where their money making is.
Yeah.
Salman, did you know your husband was going to do this?
While his wife continues to be questioned on what she knew, the massacre has brought together two of the biggest issues in American politics: terrorism and gun control. Donald Trump has fallen in the polls since the attack, so now wants to be the man who delivers gun control. "I'll be meeting the National Rifle Association," he tweeted, about not allowing people on the terrorist watch list to buy guns. Under Obama, that idea was voted down under pressure from the gun lobby. It's a major shift. Trump's reaction to the massacre so far focused on Muslims.
And I watched President Obama, and he was more angry at me than he was at the shooter. The level of anger, that's the kind of anger he should have for the shooter and these killers that shouldn't be here.
The much bigger Democrat ambition, which the NRA will never back, is a return to a federal ban on assault weapons. The rifle used by Omar Mateen was similar to the AR-15, one of the most common weapons in America for hunting, targets and protection. It's a semi-automatic. You have to pull the trigger every time to fire. Its bullets are actually smaller than many handguns.
So I can actually create more damage using a handgun. The bullet holes from the .45 are this top target here. The bullet holes from the .223 are this bottom target here.
But crucially, assault rifles take magazines of 30 bullets at a time.
All I have to do is take the magazine out, put another magazine, and I'm ready.
And in most states here, it is astonishingly easy for a US citizen or permanent resident to buy one. To show how easy, we sent our video editor Chris to the nearest gun shop. How long would it take? In Florida, the law says people must wait 3 days before being allowed to buy a handgun. But it's perfectly legal for a dealer to sell a long gun, such as an assault rifle, to anyone walking in off the street. It took Chris just 15 minutes. So that was easy?
That was way too easy.
And what is it?
This is the AR-15. They could sell me different levels of the AR-15, but I just got the most basic one. I walked in, I said, I want to go to a gun range and shoot a semi-automatic weapon like an AR-15, a semi-automatic weapon. He goes, an AR-15? I'm like, yeah, sounds good. He goes, I said, I'm from out of state. He said, that's no problem. I said, here's my driver's license. He goes, fill this form out. It took me like literally a minute to fill the form out. They ran a background check. Done.
A military-style weapon cost just £500. Did they ask you any questions?
No.
What you wanted it for?
No.
Or?
No questions asked.
15 minutes and virtually no questions asked, and that's precisely the problem for gun campaigners, because it is simply too easy for anyone to walk into a shop and come out with a weapon that was specifically designed to fire as many bullets as possible, as quickly as possible. But even Democrats aren't trying a new assault weapons ban yet. Tonight, the best they can do is reintroduce legislation to stop people on terror watch lists from buying them. But they'll need Trump and the NRA to get even that through. And just to let you know that the weapon that we bought in that piece is now being handed over to the police, who will destroy it. Now, Donald Trump has just been speaking, and as ever, his messages can be slightly confusing to decipher, because this time he has actually been talking about people having more guns rather than less.
If some of those great people that were in that club that night had guns strapped to their waist or strapped to their ankle, and if the bullets were going in the other direction aimed at this guy who was just open target practice, you would have had a situation, folks, which would have been always horrible, but nothing like the carnage that we all as a people suffered this weekend. Nothing.
Hillary Clinton has also just been speaking, and she's chosen to attack Trump on what he's been saying about Muslims and Muslim immigrants.
This approach isn't just wrong. It is dangerous, and I want to emphasize and underline this. Of course we want to keep our country safe. Of course we want to work together in order to do that. That should go without saying. But I want to underscore we rely on partners in majority Muslim countries to help us fight terrorists.
Well, meanwhile, Democrats in the Senate are currently filibustering, constantly talking, basically, until they get their way, saying that they will hold the floor of the House until their Republican colleagues agree to bring back some sort of gun control debate. The Connecticut Senator, Chris Murphy, has said he will stay there until we get some signal.
What our goal and objective is in this now 3.5-hour debate.
Well, joining me now is Randy Ross, who is a community activist and Republican political operative here in Orlando. We showed how easy it is to buy an assault rifle today, $700, 15 minutes. Do you think it's too easy?
Of course it's too easy, but the reality of the situation is I support the Second Amendment. I support a person's right to bear arms. Do I believe that a person on the FBI watch list or someone who can't fly in an airplane should be able to buy an assault weapon or any weapon at all? I do not support that.
But anyone else, anyone else should be able to just buy a rifle so long as they don't have a criminal
You could buy a pressure
record.
cooker. We saw that with the Boston
Yeah, but the
bombing.
point is that Omar Mateen, wasn't on a watch list, was able to buy a weapon, despite previous concerns about him.
Yeah, he could have used a box cutter to take down airplanes, as we saw in 9/11. The weapon is not the problem. The people are the problem. The people who get the weapons are the problem.
But Donald Trump, the man you support, in fact, you're chairing his campaign in this area, he's now joined in this idea that people who are on terror watch lists shouldn't be allowed to buy weapons. I mean, what would that?
I'm speaking to you today as an activist and volunteer and a person who lives a mile away. I'm not speaking on behalf of the campaign.
Okay, but you are a Trump supporter, aren't you?
I am a Trump supporter.
So he, in fact, you're running his campaign here. I mean, he says that this would make a difference. Haven't you just suggested it wouldn't?
What do you mean? Say it again. Say the question close.
Stopping people who are on terror watch lists from buying weapons is now a policy that Donald Trump wants to adopt. He's trying to get the
I
NRA
think that's a great policy.
to sign up to that.
I think that's a policy that I would support.
But that wouldn't have done anything to prevent this
But if there are
happening.
more people in that club, and it's right there, we can see it from here. I've been in that club many times. I went there the night of they opened that club. Had more people had weapons in there, they most likely could have stopped him a lot sooner than killing 49 people. Would it have been as easily as stopping multiple bullets? No.
That's a slightly different question, though, isn't it? I mean, the point is
that's answering your
why.
question.
Well, no, it's not really, because the question I'm asking you is whether he should have been able to get hold of a weapon in the first place
He passed
so easily.
all of the right, unfortunately, based on the fact that he'd been interviewed by as we know, by the FBI multiple times, he passed all of the requirements in the state of Florida and federally to be able to get that gun. Do I understand that a person who's been interviewed by the FBI and might be considered a terrorist should be able to do that? No. But that's not my policy to speak on.
But that leaves you in a position where people who are terrorists, or who are lone wolves, can just walk into a shop in 15 minutes, take out an assault rifle, and walk into
Listen, this
a
issue
school,
is a
a
very
nightclub,
clear
anywhere
issue of
they want.
radical Islamic terrorism, in my opinion. People who at a distance start believing in something, not even that they've been
Obviously,
charged
you
with
have
the
to be a
idea.
terrorist with those designs.
father
But the
called him a
question is how easy it is to do. And the law here makes it very easy because you can just buy
There are millions
guns
of
very
guns
easily.
in the world. You cannot take guns away from bad people. Bad people are going to do things
But there are
with
more
guns.
guns here than in most places.
It doesn't change the end result. It could have been a pressure cooker. It could have been a box knife on an airplane. We've seen that happen time and time again. That happened, and I still don't even know how he got the gun in there. I'd love to. I've been in the bathrooms there before. I have to wonder, did he put the gun together? What was the process? What was the planning? We now know that his wife was here, and I think that's a whole other issue we need to discuss.
And do you think Trump is right to question whether this man's parents were right to be allowed in from Afghanistan to the United States?
I'm not going to speak on
Given
that.
that he
I
was
don't speak
born
for my
here,
candidate. I speak for my own feelings.
Well, I'm asking you, do you think that's a correct thing to say?
I think that it is fair and reasonable that we need to find a way to stop Muslims and those that we believe might be affecting this country's safety until such time as our country can stop and spend more time getting things in perspective. And I say that to you as an openly gay man of 50 years old, as a Republican, which is not popular, okay, by the way. I say that we have to do more than what we're doing. This will happen again. It just happened right here in my own backyard. It just happened in the city, beautiful. It just happened here. But, more importantly, tonight I think they buried the first of the folks that have fallen. When I talk to people that knew those folks, I didn't know any of the people that passed away. I worry more about how their families are going to process this and how is our community going to heal. We're going to be hearing about this for so many years to come. We will be known not just as a theme park city, we're going to be known as the second largest terrorist attack on American soil. And
Randy
that's not
Ross,
great.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, now, there has been one other major piece of news here in Florida, normally a place, of course, of family happy holidays, which is a horrific event in which a 2-year-old child was taken by an alligator from a Disney World Resort hotel not far from here. The police say that the child's father attempted to grab the body before it disappeared into the water of a lake, and that lake is now the subject of a huge search, diving teams, many police officers involved, and that lake by a Disney hotel is now the focus of a great deal of attention, and police are expected to update us on that search later today. But that's it from Florida. Now back to John.
Well, now, for Wales, the biggest story this week, eclipsing all else, will be tomorrow night's football match against England in the Euro 2016 series. Tonight, there were some disturbances in Lille between English, Welsh and Russian fans in the city centre. Our sports reporter, Cayman Zeram, is there and joins us live. Cayman.
Good evening, John. In fact, from northern France in Lille, it's time, and good time, that we can start talking about the football, because tens of thousands of Welsh and English fans have started to arrive ahead of their game just down the road in Lens. And it is Wales, surprisingly for some, who top the group, and all is calm. However, it hasn't been like this all day. I'm afraid to say late this afternoon, a very large group of British fans, mixed English and Welsh, were at a pub, singing, chanting, dancing as they do. and Russian fans were passing. A firecracker was started, we don't know by who, and a very large group of the British fans started running after the Russia fans through the back streets of Lille. It was very ugly, very unpleasant. Some very unpleasant things were chanted about the Russia fans. Some minor scuffles broke out, and it only dispersed after the police used tear gas and pepper spray to get rid of everyone. Now, as for the football, both England and Russia are at threat of disqualification from this tournament if fans don't behave in the stadium. Russia were beaten by Slovakia 2-1. Everything was calm except for a firework that was set off from the stands. Not in itself enough to see them disqualified, but questions about security. How did it get in there? Meanwhile, a minor diplomatic spat has broken out. The French ambassador to Moscow has been asked to explain why a coachload of Russia fans were detained pending deportation when they left Marseille. But as I said tonight, in Lille, everything's calm.
Kemi and Serum in Lille. Now, after the break, the view from the valleys. Leave or remain? Welcome back to Cardiff. It's perhaps a measure of how tight the referendum contest has become that two politically opposite heads of government, David Cameron and the Labour First Minister Carwyn Jones, were campaigning together here today. Torfaen in the Welsh Valleys is a constituency that has been traditionally Labour, but where UKIP gained more than 22% of the vote in the recent Welsh Assembly elections. Andy Davies has been finding out how the referendum issues, particularly immigration, may be swaying decisions.
This is Steve, former nurse turned record stall owner, a Labour Party member who wants Wales to remain in the EU. And across from him, Phil, ex-steelworker turned butcher, a UKIP supporter who wants to leave the EU, just like his friend Jeff.
I really want the Australian system. If you want to come to this country, you need to support yourself, you need to work, you need to contribute a skill or a trade, and then you're welcome to come.
It's quiet, they're taking a break. Europe, the topic, and immigration, the starting point.
Without migration, the NHS would collapse. It would collapse. Public services would collapse without migrants.
But if we didn't have the immigrants, we wouldn't have 1.odd million people out on the dole at the moment. We are keeping people that shouldn't be here. Left, right and centre, where they're coming from, over borders, over the fence, you name it, where they're coming from. You know, it's gone beyond a joke.
What do you say to that, Steve?
I just think it's an incorrect argument. I don't think there aren't. We are not flooded by migrants. Look around Pontypool. How many people do you see in Pontypool?
The only reason you can't see it in Pontypool is colour. Where you could see a black man in Pontypool and think, oh, yeah. But the only time you ever hear an immigrant in Pontypool is when they open their mouth. And then you go to all the car boot sales, which I'd go to in Abergavenny, they're flooded with immigrants over there.
In this constituency of Torfaen, it's estimated just over 3% of the population were born outside the UK. But fears over immigration have been a major factor in UKIP's rise in these old Labour heartlands. And as we found on this Cwmbran housing estate, helping drive the Leave vote.
I've already voted, yeah.
Which way?
Out.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because all the foreigners coming into the country all the time, all the immigrants and all, I'll be honest with you. I'm struggling to find work and, you know, and I got foreigners taking jobs every day from you. So
what sort of work are you looking for?
Anything, any work, even factory jobs, and they've been taken, so I'm definitely for Leave.
How about you, madam?
Sorry, what?
Staying in the European Union or leaving?
No, Leave.
50 people expressed a preference to us, 25 for Remain, 25 for Leave. Completely unscientific, but in line with the most recent Wales poll, which saw both camps in a dead heat.
I'm going to stay because we haven't got the knowledge of what's going to happen afterwards.
Want to stay in the European Union or go?
We'll stay.
I'm going to vote to stay in.
Yes.
Because it's so uncertain what will happen if we come out.
You're going to vote to stay or to leave? What do you think?
To leave.
How are you going to vote?
Out.
And why's that?
Because my nan told me to.
Your nan told you to. What about you?
I don't really understand it all.
I want to stay.
You want to stay?
Because it's for my benefit.
Do you think Labour's got a bit of a challenge round here to convince people to remain?
They've got a massive challenge. And I think, you know, if they don't get their act together,
The rest is going to be history.
Which is exactly the same.
Back in Pontypool, in the indoor market refurbished with EU funds, the debate turns to the economy.
Wales is a small country. If the UK pulls out of Europe, we will be further isolated.
Don't you think if we got out of this European thing, we'd be a lot more richer?
With trading with whom? The biggest single market we have is Europe. You said about looking after our own. We are the 5th wealthiest nation on earth.
And let's remain that way. Yeah. And under Europe, we're not going to.
Well, we have been for the last... How long have we been in the EU?
Our money is going away to all these different people. If we kept our money in our pocket, we would need to be spending billions of pounds on other countries.
Which way is a town like Pontypool going to vote? Remain or leave?
Out, 100%.
100%.
You think, Steve, what do you think? Do you think you're a bit of a lone voice?
I think it's too close to call, genuinely.
And many right now wouldn't argue with that.
Darling, you got to let me know.
Andy Davis reporting. Well, now I'm joined by some local people here from Cardiff, and well, there are rather divided opinions here. You've come in from the market. You're still smelly of fish, which is a very charming experience. But I mean, tell him he's an in man. He's campaigning for in. And what's your problem?
Well, quite simply, I personally don't think that the EU will exist. I personally think that the EU is anti-democratic. It does not control. I personally believe, quite simply, that Britain should be more sovereign outside than in. I don't think that British sovereignty will exist if we stayed in. I read the 5 Presidents' report. Quite simply,
don't let him get away with it. Let's hear your corner.
This sovereignty, this is a word that people keep throwing about sovereignty. What does it actually mean? They keep talking about sovereignty.
Yeah.
Things that actually matter to people, the economy is what matters to people. We leave, already 100 billion has been wiped off the FTSE 500 companies in the last 5 days. That's just the threat of us leaving. If we actually leave, 9 out of 10 economists all agree that it's going to be bad for us if we leave.
Now, I can see you nodding your head there and indeed shaking it, but you're a UKIP man, and UKIP's new in Wales.
Sorry?
You're a UKIP man, right?
I am indeed.
And they're really making a swathe now.
Yeah,
is that
we are.
because of Europe?
Yes, it is because of Europe. You just said, what sovereignty? Lots of people here want to make their own laws and decide what their own future is. Having unelected people over in Brussels making those decisions isn't something that's appealing.
What about unelected people in the House of Lords? Like,
That's exactly, but that's something for us to make our own minds up after what we want to do. No, it's not. I'm not in favour of the House of Lords. I'd like to see a reformed House of Lords. But one thing I don't want is unelected people in Brussels currently. That's what this decision is about, this referendum, not the House of Lords. Do we want Brussels making our laws?
Hang on a moment. Let me hear from you, because it's not about unelected people anywhere. It's about your life, isn't it?
Yeah, in my opinion is, as the same as a lot of young people, is that we want to be able to free to move around Europe. For me, I want to go and study in Budapest abroad, and I won't be able to do that if we leave Europe.
Why wouldn't you be able to study?
Because I can't afford it. Currently, as a European citizen, and I go to study at this university, they'll fund my education.
You realise we used to be able to travel before we were in the EU?
I do, not with fluidity of movement.
How are you able to guarantee that that's going to be the same case after we come out of Europe?
Why wouldn't it?
Why would you make it difficult?
It's not difficult. I've actually recently driven from Britain to Slovakia with one of the easiest journeys of my life to attend my friend's wedding.
Yeah.
And I would have been able to do that as short notice and as cheaply as I did.
But let's spare a thought for a moment for this young woman, because she's German, but she's lived here almost half her life. She's as Welsh as you are. And what's happening to you?
I'm not allowed to vote in the referendum because I'm German. I've lived here for 12 years. I'm a taxpayer. I pay national insurance contributions. And it's incredibly frustrating for people like me where there is no clear answer. We don't know what's going to happen to people like myself. And also, I'm an immigrant in this country. I came here to set my life up. I've lived for 12 years and it's very frustrating.
What has UKIP got to say to this immigrant here?
What do you mean, what have I got to say?
Well, you know, she's part of the problem, isn't she?
No, I wouldn't say she's a part of the problem at all. What we're advocating is an Australian point-based system where anyone can come here. You know, there's lots of people in Spain feeling the same way as she is. Hopefully, the negotiation period we have within the 2 years, I couldn't see anyone saying, you're off. I think that's wrong. And I do think you should maybe have a right to vote in this.
Okay, well, let me just ask you two, because you're both sort of outers. emergency budget immediately after Britain leaves Europe, and tax rises of 2%. Is that okay with you? That's today's little emergency budget announced by Mr. Osborne.
That's if you believe Mr. Osborne.
You don't believe him?
Of course not.
Or only
Of course not.
MPs do.
6 months ago, we were being told we're strong enough, we can make our own way outside the EU. That's what David Cameron said he was going to negotiate. Yep. Now, it's look at all the scare we've had. It's a disaster.
All
so
I've succeeded in doing is stirring the pot here in this Cardiff pub just to get him into a bit of trouble now. They're going to leave them discussing us for the rest of the evening. But tonight, that's it from Cardiff. That's Channel 4 News. Good evening.